Or two. So if you'd find a seat, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Leave about 12 to see somebody.
Fine.
I'll be back.
Yeah. No, that'll be fine. I just saw.
Did you
Yeah.
the Obama thing?
Yeah.
Are you going to say something?
I am.
Yeah. I hope Susan-
Caroline, the student from Georgetown, was arrested at the White House in a Keystone protest, so she started crying.
Oh, that's wonderful. And, I hope Suzanne will,
Yeah.
she's probably working from her
Oh, I bet.
hotel.
I bet. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't heard anything from her that she's not coming. So.
I think she'll be here.
But it may be something.
Yeah, it'd be neat. Well, we're very pleased to begin the next session, which focuses on the leadership of students in colleges and universities to develop and really promote the fossil fuel divestment movement in this country and around the world. I wanted to take just a brief moment out for those of you who haven't been checking your news feeds to note that in just a few minutes, President Obama will announce that he has rejected the request to build the Keystone XL oil pipeline. We'll keep tracking this story as it unfolds in the course of the day. But I know Caroline James on our panel was actually arrested in a civil disobedience protest at the White House on Keystone XL and spoke about this at TEDx Georgetown just a couple weeks ago, so has a particularly personal involvement. I want to just briefly explain why this panel is such an important part of our conference. Regardless of whether or not one is representing a college or university here at this conference, and for those of us from colleges and universities, regardless of whether or not there have been active and prominent student activist campaigns, it's clear that as you look at the national landscape, it is college and university students, really more than any other body, who have motivated the fossil fuel divestment campaign. And their success and influence, the publicity that they've gained, and also the broad network of relationships they've built around climate justice issues really has been something from which all of us have learned. So our hope in this panel is that students will be able to articulate some of the ways in which climate justice has become particularly important in their lives and on their campuses. Secondly, that they'll be able to share some of the things they've learned in the work that they've done as advocates on their campus. And thirdly, that the rest of us will be able to learn some things that can be applicable to our institutions, regardless of whether or not we're working in colleges and universities. So we'll proceed in order from your right to your left, and I'll introduce each student one by one. They'll each have a short time for their remarks, and then we'll open things up for questions. So beginning on your right, my right, Erin Sutton is currently a senior studying physics and mathematics at Boston College. She grew up outside of Boston, is currently applying to graduate schools in solid-state physics. She became involved in BC's fossil fuel divestment campaign in 2013 and in 2014 has been involved in national organizing with the Fossil Fuel Divestment Student Network. It's a great pleasure to have Erin Sutton with us.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me all right? Is this microphone well placed? Great. It is just a remarkable pleasure to be here. I'll preface my remarks with this is a whole new world, being in Dayton, a school that has actually divested and where everyone here is very excited about divestment. It's very much not like that at BC. But before I go more into that, I would like to quote directly from BC's Ethical Investment Guidelines. Just from hearing the talks throughout today and the opening remarks last night, our investment guidelines at least echo much of what has been said. BC is a Jesuit Catholic institution of higher education. In the management of its investments, BC reflects the ethical, social, and moral principles inherent in its mission and heritage. In particular, the university is firmly committed to the promotion of the dignity of the individual, personal freedom, and social justice. They go on to say that the Board of Trustees desires that BC investments be handled in accordance with these principles, so that gains from investments will not be derived from fraud, abuse of power, greed, or injustice. And I think that, doing this work, we know that fossil fuel companies, employ all of these adjectives and nouns. And then they go on to say, a constant attempt will be made to apply these principles to the university's investment practices. So this is up on the university's websites. In the past 35 years, BC has grown a lot. Our endowment 35 years ago was $18 million, and now it is $2.2 billion. That's a lot of money and a lot of power. And being a senior and also having a sibling who went to Boston College and really living a life very closely tied to the institution, Jesuit values permeate everything. They're in extracurriculars, they're in class, they're when you get off campus and do your service trips. It really informs everything that BC does. And the school loves to cite its Jesuit values. And as a Catholic student, I love to cite these Jesuit values. But it seems that on divestment, when the students are citing these values, they fall on deaf ears. And I also like to read a quote from Laudato Si that I actually don't think has been read yet. And I think this kind of answers our investment guidelines. Pope Francis said, "It is remarkable how weak international responses have been to climate change. The failure of global summits on the environment make it plain that our politics are subject to technology and finance. There are too many special interests and economic interests easily up-trumping the common good and manipulating information so that their own plans will not be affected." He goes on to say that consequently, the most one can expect is superficial rhetoric, sporadic acts of philanthropy, and perfunctory expressions of concern for the environment, whereas any genuine attempt of groups within society to introduce change is viewed as a nuisance and is viewed as based on romantic illusions or as an obstacle. And that resonates with me deeply. To go a bit more into the Boston College situation, even though it feels much of the time the school tries to out-Catholic everyone else, when answering Pope Francis's call for environmental stewardship, for stewardship over the oppressed, BC has not really made much action. There was a conference at the beginning of the year at Boston College on Laudato Si and climate change. And I was actually able to personally meet with Cardinal Turkson, who was in the video last night, and it was incredible. Because through the national organizing that I've done, I've been able to work with students at many institutions, Catholic, Christian, not religiously affiliated. And about 100 schools I've signed on to this letter urging Pope Francis to not only divest the Vatican, but to encourage divestment at our universities. So luckily through that and through some other connections I had, I was able to get this sneaky, quiet meeting. But during the conference itself, BC actually screened questions from the audience to make sure no one mentioned divestment. I've been a part of this campaign for, I can't believe how long, 3 years since, and just 2 months ago, the university decided to actually recognize the campaign. Before that, our actions, our requests, our protests were met with sanctions, with disciplinary action, probation, I've had police reports written about me on campus for trying to deliver letters to our president. The president's secretary has even said to us, you expect to get a meeting with the president of the university? CEOs can't even get a meeting. Who do you think you are? And I think I'm a student at a university that should have a say. So even though this divestment campaign didn't start on principles of building student power and student advocacy, we kind of fell into that niche. And at BC, there are many issues with student rights and free speech. And hopefully you've seen on some media, we've been working really hard to try to fight this battle in the press, because that gets their attention and pushes their buttons a little bit. But both on and off campus, what has happened through the divestment movement as it has grown and become more sophisticated and powerful, young people have realized that climate change is a symptom of a larger broken system. And a lot of, sorry, I get emotional about these things. It takes a lot of privilege to be able to be a person, to spend your time fighting climate change and climate injustice. Through the DSN, which Paul mentioned, which has been the most amazing experience of my life, I've been able to meet leaders that are outside the climate movement, leaders leading the movement for Black and brown lives, leaders fighting for immigration reform and economic justice. And many of those leaders have felt uncomfortable in environmental spaces and divestment spaces because they're spaces of privilege where we speak about the oppressed, but common rhetoric is to cite places where, in the world where sea level rise is flooding out poor communities. But divestment started at Swarthmore College with students in solidarity with communities right in Appalachia, fighting fossil fuel extraction on the front lines. Those frontline communities are all around us, and not all communities have the power and the privilege to fight the pipelines. I had the privilege of being arrested, fighting Keystone XL, and I get to feel a part of this victory. But not everyone has that privilege to go voluntarily be arrested and not worry about what's going to happen to them. Just to cite one statistic that I think embodies a lot of what I'm saying is, for every 1,000 people, 106 white Americans have asthma, but 78 white Americans have asthma, but 106 Black Americans do. And I think just on and off campus, I want to mention this because the fights are so tied together, and we have to think about which communities are on the front lines of fossil fuel extraction. And that is what, that's just what a lot of young people are working towards. And I'm not sure if I'm going over time, so, okay. Divestment has been tied into just other fights against injustice. And I want to make the distinction that a renewable economy is guaranteed, no matter how long it takes. We are the people who are going to speed this up, but it's going to happen. But a just economy is not guaranteed. There was recently a report that came out that Solar City, who I have friends who work for them, they were funding, they were building solar projects in Oregon using prison labor. And that's not just. And renewable energy, as a physicist who actually, like, in the lab week to week works on renewable technology, it is not inherently just. And if we are the people building the new economy, we need to think about who is in the room, who gets to be here, and who doesn't. And make sure that when we build this new future, that it's not only for the privileged people. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I've taken away from this, where I was introduced to this movement through 350 parts per million and 2 degrees Celsius. But as I've been in this movement, it's been more about people. Of course, I love the polar bears. I'm a vegan, I love animals, but it's really about the people. So I will wrap up with that. I would love to talk to anyone after this as well.
Our next speaker is Caroline James, who's a senior at Georgetown studying government and environmental studies. She just learned she has a job next year, which is very nice.
Employment.
In DC, I'm sure her parents are pleased as well. Caroline has been involved in Georgetown University Fossil Free since its creation in 2012. And Georgetown University Fossil Free was really the primary agent in persuading Georgetown's board of directors to make a divestment decision regarding direct investments in coal in June of 2015. So Caroline.
Yeah, thank you. I want to highlight two kind of levels of this divestment discussion. I took kind of an informal poll this morning to get a sense of what you all wanted to hear from the students, because in some ways it feels strange for a few 22-year-olds to be up on this stage telling you guys things, but of course there's power in the youth. The two levels I'd like to highlight are the kind of philosophy behind divestment, why it is that we think we're doing what we're doing, and also some of the kind of on-the-ground tactics, especially having to do with Georgetown's insubstantial divestment from coal, this announcement that happened in June. So just to give you a little bit of context, sorry, I'm shaking a little bit, and that's because of the Keystone decision. I'm just a little bit bowled over, so we should definitely take some time to reflect on that victory at some point today. In terms of Georgetown's decision to divest from coal, it's been a problem because we haven't fully been able to celebrate it as a victory. As Dr. Benson said, our campaign began in 2012 when I was just a first year at Georgetown, and then in June we were able to persuade the board of directors to divest its direct holdings in coal companies, which unfortunately sounds like a bigger victory than it was. It was big in the sense that it made a lot of news, and that's really good. But I can't even begin to explain to you my frustration seeing the press release on the website of our main administrative building, surrounded by daffodils saying, look how green we are. When in fact, what they were basically saying, I think one Bloomberg article did a better job by including the headline, Georgetown decides to keep investments in coal, oil, and gas in commingled funds. I thought that was a much more accurate description of what actually happened, considering that our proposal asked for the divestment of the top 200 coal, oil, and gas companies. So just to get a little bit back to the philosophy of why it is that we do what we do. And I know that this is clear to many of you, but I think this is generally what we say, and I know it can be different at other campaigns. Often people ask me, why divestment instead of asking them to put in energy efficient lighting, improving recycling, composting, working on national legislation? And I say, look, I'm all for that. That's fantastic. We fully support those efforts. However, an operating principle, especially for us at GU Fossil Free, is do what you can with what you have where you are. And what we happen to be is students, and what we happen to have is a university endowment. And what we happen to be able to do right now is to say, is that endowment really aligned with our morals, with Georgetown's morals, with our Jesuit morals? And so a lot of what our proposal focuses on is saying, look, Georgetown has made pretty good strides with a lot of sustainability efforts. We're really proud of those, and we think those should continue. We think it's hypocritical that you're doing all of these things, you're working to move away from fossil fuels, and yet you're continuing to invest in them. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to us. So we want to align those morals with our investments. We think that that makes sense. Another piece of this is people ask, well, you're not going to make a financial splash on these companies. And we say, yeah, we're aware of that. I mean, we have a $1.5 billion endowment. Most of that is not invested directly. Most of that is in commingled funds. Most of it is not managed by Georgetown. We understand that we're just a drop in the bucket of what these companies have invested. However, I mean, I think some of you probably saw one of the images going around, I think it was a couple months ago, that as of pretty recently, $2.6 trillion worth of endowments, pension funds, all kinds of other things have been declared to be fossil-free funds because of the divestment movement. $2.6 trillion is not a small amount of money. It might be small in comparison to the larger fossil fuel industry, but that's not a small amount of money. But at the end of the day, we're not expecting to make the financial impact. Even the insubstantial divestment that Georgetown chose to do made a whole bunch of headlines. I can't tell you how many calls we were getting for interviews and press and all kinds of stuff where we were very honest saying, this isn't quite what we were hoping for. It's a little step, but the press is huge, and it's a lot of pressure. One of the pressure points that we want to speak of is the coalition of student campaigns. The fact that you have 3 students sitting here right now just from 3 distinct universities shows you that, this is not relegated to just one campus. These campaigns do not exist in a vacuum. One of the things that's been the best about this movement is meeting other students like Tessa and Erin about, why it is that we're doing what we're doing and sharing in our campaigns. And what's fun is, though, even though we're saying we want Georgetown to be the next one to divest, a victory for any of us is a victory for all of us, clearly. We get to put that pressure on. I was so excited when the University of Dayton divested because I got to go to the Georgetown Board of Directors and say, y'all missed an opportunity here. This was huge, and you missed it. We're the first Catholic university in America, the first Jesuit university in America, and y'all missed an opportunity. You missed a big press point, and as someone said earlier, eventually it's going to affect your reputation. And I'm hoping that that happens pretty soon. Another piece that I would like to touch on, sorry, I tend to get a little cynical. But now that Keystone has been rejected, I guess I shouldn't be as cynical anymore. Another piece that I'd like to talk about a little bit are some of the tactics that we've used to get our way. You can say 2012 we began our campaign, 2015 we got a little victory. So what on earth happened in those 3 years? A 50-page proposal happened with 2.5 years worth of research. We have been working with the Georgetown Committee on Investments and Social Responsibility, which is CISR. We affectionately call it CISR for the sake of brevity. CISR, just to preface, is an utter and complete farce. It's been really extraordinarily frustrating to be working there. I've been on a lot of committees at my time at Georgetown. It's the most dysfunctional committee I've ever sat on. One of the things we found out was that there was supposed to be a student representative on this committee. And so we went to the student government and said, who appoints this? And they said, oh, we do. We said, can we get a student on there? And they said, sure, one of y'all want to do it? I said, sure, I'll do it. So I've been sitting on this committee. We call ourselves the Green Mafia because we just infiltrate wherever we can. And so we've gotten in there. CISR has worked hard to keep up this idea that shareholder engagement has been the way to work. And one of our biggest tactics has been exposing and researching all the ways that, as someone said, it's a fool's game to go into that and think that we're going to have any effect. If they're saying that divestment would just be, a drop in the bucket in terms of effect on these companies, what makes them think that the shareholder engagement can be any more effective? And so we just began plugging away at some of the numbers as they haven't been available, but we've been prodding a little bit. And saying, so CISR only has jurisdiction to engage in direct investments. They say yes, and we say, so that's less than 5% of the endowment? And they say yes. We say, so are we invested in many companies directly that are involved in the fossil fuel business? And they say no. We say, so how do you expect to engage in any meaningful way on the fossil fuel issue? And they don't know. So we've been pushing that divestment issue pretty hard just as a way, we're not going to be able to have that effect in terms of engagement. We've also been leveraging our position in DC. As I said, the student coalitions can be really strong. We have a whole bunch of universities in DC. I swear most of the residents of DC are students. So we're able to join together and support each other's campaigns. So we've been to rallies at George Washington University, at American University, at Catholic University. So we've been able to leverage that. And we've bird-dogged our board a little bit. It was, Erin and I were talking about the lack of transparency from our boards of directors and our boards of trustees. And so we launched, I think this has been one of our best tactics, we launched a Meet Your Board campaign. And it was a social media campaign where we researched every member of the board, found out where their investments are, where their political contributions are going, where they're involved, what other boards they sit on. We found some pretty unsavory things. We also found, I guess you can imagine. We also found a board that was by and large old white men, which nothing against old white men, but we needed some women and some people of color on that board, and we were able to expose that a little bit. So every day for 40 days leading up to the vote in June, we published one of the photos with a description of, it wasn't going after them in a way like this person is terrible. It's just saying this person is involved in this corporation, is on this board doing X, Y, and Z, and saying, Georgetown students, you should get to know who's on your board, who's making these decisions, because we didn't want that one board decision to, by and large, dictate what people thought the official decision on divestment was, because it wasn't fair. Because many of our board members live and work in DC, we were able to bird dog them a little bit. We went to their offices every day for 40 days leading up to our vote. We brought them articles, we brought them our proposals. Eventually they started escorting us out of buildings, which, it's fun. It's a good time. I highly recommend it. If you've never been escorted out of a building, definitely do it. It's fun to watch people, because, it's DC. People expect that you're like a national security threat. I'm pretty sure I'm on a no-fly list somewhere. But we went to their offices and we didn't leave them alone. The last point I'd like to make is about the, cultivating activist culture at these universities. It's been really interesting to me that even in a place like DC and at prestigious colleges like Notre Dame and like Boston College, a lot of students shy away from kind of getting involved in that. I can't tell you how many people said to me after I was arrested, you're never gonna get a job. And honest to goodness, I have a job offer before most of my peers. That's pretty exciting. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. Yay, employment. Not living on the streets yet. So with the activist culture, and it sounds like it's really being put down at BC, and that's very alarming to me. We've been saying to students, you can do some of the behind the screen activism as much as you want, share posts and hope that that's going to make a difference. And I mean, yeah, the publicity's great, but at the end of the day, doing letter deliveries to your president's office, making phone calls to alumni, going to your board members' offices, it's a lot more effective. It took a while for us to persuade our first-year students last year that going to these board members' offices was a good idea. They said, isn't that threatening to them? Like, that's not very respectful. And I said, no, it is respectful, because what you're saying is that these people are making an important decision, and you care enough about what it is that they're deciding on that you want to inform them, that you want to take the time out of your busy day where goodness knows you have homework to go to these offices and say, I think there's some information that you need to know. And if getting escorted out of the office is part of that experience, so be it. I'd be happy to talk with anyone after this panel. I know it's been quite a ramble. I tend to wax lyrical about it a little bit. I'm so empowered by the people power that's gone behind this campaign. And it has definitely been the most formative experience of my time at Georgetown, even though we're not a recognized group, and it has involved an arrest record and several pairs of handcuffs. So I'm very proud of that. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tessa Clarizio, who's a junior at Notre Dame, majoring in environmental engineering and minoring in energy studies. Tessa is president of Green ND, I believe, and has been involved with fossil-free ND since her freshman year. Tessa, like any good engineering student, couldn't leave Notre Dame's campus until she got all of her homework assignments submitted, which was fairly late last night. So she arrived in the wee hours of the morning. And so I'm really pleased that Tessa could get here on time and join us. Thanks, Tessa.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and talk about my experiences with fossil-free ND on campus. So I'm going to give you an overview of some of the things we've done and also talk about the lessons I've learned from being a part of this campaign and also through my role as president of Green ND. So we started our fossil fuel divestment movement. We actually didn't start as a divestment movement. We started as a carbon neutrality movement. We really wanted to emphasize the social justice implications of climate change. So we thought carbon neutrality was the best way to do that, and we launched in the spring of 2014. So you may be wondering, why is it called We Are 9? It's supposed to symbolize that we stand in solidarity with the 9 billion people on the planet by 2050, and also a play on words of We Are ND, which is a common football chant. And football is very much part of Notre Dame culture. So the reason I'm including this is because it's how we developed our framework, how we built our basis. So we employed a lot of, activist methods. We had a photo campaign, a petition, a letter writing campaign, and we just had a continued and sustained presence throughout the semester. We organized events, so people heard about We Are 9, learned about what we stood for, and our end result at the end of the semester was we were able to secure a meeting with the administration to talk about carbon neutrality. We kind of got a no, or it's way too ambitious of a goal, you're gonna raise costs so much, are you gonna go tell students they have to pay higher tuition? Okay, I thought not. So we took the summer as a way to really refocus and think about how we can achieve our goal of acting on the social justice implications of climate change that wasn't carbon neutrality. So what we came up with was fossil fuel divestment. That summer was when Dayton divested from fossil fuel, and that's kind of how we got the idea. It was a very substantial and clear thing we as a Catholic university could do. So we launched our divestment campaign at the beginning of the semester, and we really focused on building a framework around that. And the way we did that is we had these trainings where we taught people how to engage on one-on-one action, how to talk to people about divestment. And we went door knocking. Here's a picture of us practicing door knocking in one of our meetings. You know, knock on the door. There's no door, but just pretend. And just learn how to engage with people, because I think that's one of the biggest barriers. People are like, I don't know how to talk to people about the subject, so I'm kind of scared, so I just won't. So being able to kind of train people and teach them how to talk to people about divestment was I think, big step. And in 2 days, we had over 600 petition signatures. We sent everyone out to the dorm and told them to go knock on every door, and we did. And by the end of the semester, we had over 1,000 petition signatures, and we went up to the main office and delivered them along with a packet about our research in divestment and why it's an effective strategy. And what we were able to secure with that was a meeting with our university president, Father Jenkins. So while we got a no, it was okay. We got the conversation going. He agreed to meet with us, which was a huge step. So that was very encouraging. Like, we didn't expect, to be honest, we didn't expect it to happen. We didn't expect a yes in any means or even a conversation. But we got a conversation and we got a no, but it's the beginning. So we continued with our efforts. We had creative ways to engage students. This was Global Divestment Day, which was Valentine's Day. So we were break up with fossil fuels. Terrible. And then at the end of the semester, we launched our name change, Fossil Free ND, which just kind of made it really clear what we stood for, put us in line with the national divestment campaign, allowed other universities to find us and connect with us, and then also refocus about 15 seconds of our conversations with people when they're like, why We Are 9? What does that even mean? But now it's very clear with Fossil Free ND. And we had a freeze-in outside the dining hall, metaphorically to freeze our investments in fossil fuels, literally because it was 30 degrees outside. So over the summer, something really big happened. Pope Francis released his encyclical on the environment and care for our common home. And this was a huge turning point for Notre Dame. All of a sudden, they wanted to act on sustainability. Maybe not divestment, but it was the beginning of a conversation. Our Center for Social Concerns theme was the environment, or care for our common home. The College of Business, which we're really well known for, Mendoza, had a conference on climate investing, and we did talk, while they did mention the topic of divestment there. It wasn't focused on divestment like this one is, but it showed that we are interested in acting in more sustainable ways. And one quote from the encyclical I thought related to fossil fuel divestment was when Pope Francis said that fossil fuels need to be essentially progressively replaced without delay. So I think that was a huge motivator for us, for our fossil fuel campaign, to say, yes, we are on the right track. We are doing something good, and this is something to help fossil fuels be replaced. I originally had the quote that Erin had about how any like substantial action kind of gets brushed aside, and I decided to switch it, so I'm glad I did, because otherwise it would have been repetitive. And that photo's from the papal visit. You can see a UD student there. So kind of shifting to lessons learned. The first thing I learned is that your leadership needs to be really enthusiastic. If you aren't really enthusiastic and really excited and really believe in your cause, you're not going to motivate other people, and they aren't going to act. So, and having a network of leadership is really important, because you can't do everything on your own. You can try, but you're not going to be able to have like the big impacts. You're not going to get anywhere without student support, and that student support was what allowed us to get our meetings with President Jenkins and start the conversation on divestment. Along with that is having a sustained presence on campus, so making sure you keep your name out there, keep writing Observer's our student newspaper, so student newspaper articles, chalking, social media presence, just keeping your name out there so people can get more involved and learn about you and what actions you're taking and learn why it is important. Creative ideas, I think, is a really great way to engage people, because if you don't have something creative going on, people might just not pay attention to you when you go by. So that's why we've really brainstormed to be as creative as possible. And then the next one I want to talk about is knowing your campus. And this is what Caroline and Erin kind of touched on, how the activist culture isn't really encouraged at a university like Notre Dame. Notre Dame is very much, love the Notre Dame, like you are Notre Dame, you're part of the Notre Dame family. And if you do anything to kind of challenge that or confront that, people don't like it. Students won't support it, they won't get behind it, they don't want to do anything confrontational, which divestment is kind of is confrontational. We're saying we aren't doing the right thing, we need to reinvest. So a strategy we've employed to kind of move around that is doing the activist activities, but trying to do it in the, most respectful way possible. So when we went to President Jenkins' office last year, we made it very clear that we're there for like the moral purpose, and we weren't there to like cause a problem, but we were there to cause a scene, We took pictures outside the main building. We went up to his office and delivered the packet, all like 40 of us, and we said a prayer in his office, a prayer of St. Francis, and then we stood there for 9 minutes of silence because we are 9 there at that point. And we like stood off to the side so people could still walk through. So we weren't like completely blocking his office, but that was still a big movement, and that was something a lot of students could get behind because they didn't feel like, they were protesting, they were just demonstrating. So it's been kind of a careful line to toe because students just don't want to get involved with anything that seems anti-Notre Dame. Another technique we employed was to frame it from, we love Notre Dame and we want to make it better, not so much like how dare Notre Dame be, invested in things that conflict with our Catholic moral teaching. So just framing it from that perspective. And then my last point is perseverance. And I think this is a really important concept because Notre Dame is so slow to change. And this is a theme I've gotten like through all the faculty I've worked with. They're like, yeah, we're probably like 10 years behind every other university on sustainability. We're just really slow to change, and it's in this semester when our theme is, the Center for Social Concerns theme is the environment, this is the most we've ever seen happening, and this is like the fastest change we've ever seen. So, and that's not even really a change, it's a change in focus. So, so we kind of just have to be patient. While we're pushing for change on a scale, we can't get discouraged when it's slow to happen, because that's just how it is with the university. While we are trying our hardest to speed it up, we just have to realize our university doesn't like change, and they will do anything to oppose that. But another encouraging note from the faculty I've talked with, they said while Notre Dame is slow to change, they listen to their students. Maybe the faculty, they won't listen to their complaints, but the students is what they really care about. So like having a students around divestment, that's what's gonna start the conversation, not faculty. So I think that was why we were able to meet with the administration 2 different times to talk about, you know, our goals with carbon neutrality and divestment, because our campus does really care about what our students have to say, and it does care about, I guess, our opinions and our view of the university. And then along with perseverance is realize that the opposition is going to be the loudest. So I'm going to cite an example from a different campaign for this. So we are trying to make the dining halls at Notre Dame tray-free to discourage food waste. So we had our first tray-free day last week, and the opposition to that on like Twitter and Yik Yak was huge. Students were like, how dare they take away our trays? Like, I don't care about food waste, which was very discouraging, and it made me really sad. I was like, people just don't care? Like, what is wrong with our university? But then I came to realize it's probably just a smaller group of people, like, complaining, and whereas the quiet majority is with us, they cooperated with Tray-Free Day, and I saw that when I went to the dining hall. Like, most people didn't use a tray, and it was only a few people who were like, I'm gonna take 2 trays, you know, those hippies. So, but translating it to fossil-free ND, when you hear things like ExxonMobil saying, well, divestment's pointless, we're gonna have fossil fuels in 50 years, I don't know what you're trying to achieve. Well, obviously they're protecting their own interests, but our opposition's going to be the loudest, and the people who are on our side are going to be, or on the fence, are going to be quieter. And our challenge is bringing those people into the conversation and encouraging them to speak their voice. My last point on perseverance is to take no as a starting point, because no is just the beginning of a conversation, because you propose a new idea, and especially at Notre Dame, it's going to be shut down. We're very big on tradition. We don't like change. So if we're like, how about we don't divest in fossil fuels, they'll be like, how about no? But if we keep, I suppose, like you said, keep bugging them, keep bothering them, showing them why it's important, they'll start to listen, and they'll start to do the research too, and then evaluate, is this the best method? And hopefully they'll conclude yes. So, moving forward. So this semester, or next semester, Bill McKibben is coming to Notre Dame, which I think will be huge. Like ahead of 350.org, we can build up so much momentum about that, and hopefully really call into consideration the question of divestment of Notre Dame's endowment. Notre Dame's endowment is $9.8 billion. It's huge. And divesting from fossil fuels is something, you know, we should do as a Catholic university. And I think one of the speakers in the last session said we could do with a little less money in South Bend. And why it's important to support students in their research and tuition and all that. You know, also the moral implications of, you know, an endowment that's so large, we could do with a little bit less if it means more just investments. And then one final note I wanted to touch on was the VP and treasurer of ExxonMobil emailed a couple of like the deans at Notre Dame saying, oh, I see you're gonna stop burning coal. Well, I was wondering if there was any talk on divestment on campus. because basically because they convinced Harvard and MIT not to divest, and they wanted to see if there was conversation within Notre Dame about divestment. And I think that just speaks as a testament to the efforts of Dayton divesting from fossil fuels for Catholic moral reason. The reason that ExxonMobil should be concerned that a big Catholic university may want to divest from fossil fuels is huge, and that they're concerned about it. That's just a testament to the efforts Dayton has put forward, and then Georgetown also divesting from coal. So I wanted to say thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
So we have about 15 minutes for questions before lunch. The floor is open. Amanda.
Hi, Amanda Hanley with the University of Dayton. I love what you are doing, and please keep going. I don't know why they would want to mess with any of you, but my most important question is succession planning, because I think they are probably praying every night for the day that you all graduate. So what are you doing to make sure when you leave that this keeps going?
Yeah, I have something. One of the things that's funny about Georgetown is they say, oh, you go to Georgetown, like that's a hard school to get into. I'm like, well, sure, but what's actually harder is getting into most of the other student groups. They're extraordinarily selective, which sounds really silly. There's a pretty low acceptance rate for a lot of student groups that people want to be in. We are a non-hierarchical group that anyone is welcome to join. Our meetings are open. They're always publicized. Everything's on the record. And so one of the things that we've done is said, you know what, y'all, like, just come to the meeting. Like, you don't have to apply. You don't have to wear a suit. We have like the largest student-run company in the world. It's called Students of Georgetown, Inc. They run a whole bunch of grocery stores and coffee shops and nonsense, and they have like a 2% acceptance rate. And we say, we're not the corp. You can come join us, and that's really easy. We've, because they're waiting for us to graduate, we've come up with a pretty strong mentorship plan. Now that the first group of students have graduated from our campaign, so the people who were a year above me who first started the campaign, we realized very quickly how much we really needed that succession plan. And so every year we have a strong retreat where we go over history of GU fossil free, what tactics we've used, what methods work better with some students, what work better with others, and then we always have a returning student and a new student do things together. So for example, this week we were announcing that we're having a referendum run by the student government where the whole undergraduate body will vote on whether they think divestment's a good idea. So as we were going into the interviews about the referendum from student newspapers and such, we said, okay, one returning member is going and one new student is going. The new student runs the show. The returning student fills in gaps as needed. So we do skill sharing very, very quickly, a lot of trainings about this is how you use social media, this is how you run the website, let's pass over these various accounts. We throw them in pretty quickly, and we actually find that that's the easiest way to keep them involved. When they're engaged very quickly, when they feel like their skills are being used, that they're just as valuable because we don't have a president of our organization, we are just all members of the organization, they stay involved, and that's how we keep people around. I'm really proud of our succession plan.
Erin or Tessa, did you want to say anything in response to that question?
I think Caroline covered most of it. Yeah, we have a non-hierarchical structure as well, so it's interesting to compare. But it's a very similar thing. When a new student's involved, you find out why they came to your group in the first place and have conversations and really get to know them personally. And because everyone has a stake in this. And then you plug them into what they're most passionate about doing. Or you can do what I'm doing and apply to grad school at the school you go to. So they're stuck with you for 5 more years.
There you go.
So I guess, Caroline, my question is, do you think activism works? And how does it make you feel to be active in this cause?
Yeah, isn't that the big question? I actually just gave a TED Talk at Georgetown about my arrest at Erin and I, with XL dissent at that, yeah, about what that meant, about why people said, you really think chaining yourself to a fence will do anything? And as Erin touched on as well, it's a very great privilege to be able to do those things. My dad is 70, so he gets to come in with a lot of the evidence from the larger protest times of the 60s and 70s and instilled in me very early that what you do probably won't matter, but it's extraordinarily important that you do it. I believe Gandhi said that. And so even though I was one of 400 arrested at the Keystone protest, we saw that that movement worked. We're seeing that today. Look at that. Obviously, it wasn't just that one action that pushed things through, and obviously this all applies to the divestment campaign as well. But all of these little individual snowflakes of action build up on the tree branch until the branch finally breaks. It happens. It'll happen eventually. It takes a while. And I think especially students who are so raring to go often get frustrated that things don't happen quicker. And so a lot of it is saying, you know what, we're going to sit with this discomfort, the discomfort of not winning yet, because the victories will often come. And right before this, I actually started planning a party with my GU fossil-free colleagues to celebrate the Keystone decision. So that's where I'm going tomorrow night. For the activism on campus, that's again why I think the mantra of do what you can with what you have where you are is important, because it will strengthen your ability to have power. People say, well, why don't you lobby for like a cap and trade system? And I said, well, that's great. Try to get me a meeting on Capitol Hill and we'll see how that goes. That's not gonna happen, anytime soon. So what I can do is work with the university endowment, and that pressure really works. People get intimidated by it, but I think, as Tessa said, there are very respectful ways of doing this. One of the things that worked really well for us is the president of the World Bank came to speak at Georgetown in the spring. Dr. Jim Kim has basically said that divestment is probably something that needs to happen. So we had 3 of our members walk up on the stage completely silently and drop a banner that had a quote from Dr. Kim with that. They weren't saying anything against him. In fact, they were in support of him. They were escorted off the stage, even though that was in accordance with our free speech policy for them to do that. And we protested that, and we said, you're trying to dim this activism that's important to the life of a university. I know that was a long-winded answer to your question, but I do think that the activism works so strongly, and I think it's our rent for living on this planet. Activism is your rent for living on this planet. It's let the activism itself sustain you.
Tessa or Erin, do you want to say something about your experiences?
Sure. So I think activism is effective, but again, we get frustrated that things seem so slow or they don't seem like they're happening. But I guess something encouraging is Pope Francis, being our faith leader. He really called to attention the social justice, climate change aspect. So we kind of have him behind us now. We have all this material, and the university can't ignore us. They can't kind of brush us aside because we can say, well, we should do this. The Pope said so, and I think that has a lot of weight behind it. We announced when the Pope was visiting the U.S. that we are going to stop burning coal. Was that just a coincidence? I don't think so. So having, I think this year is really the time that activism is going to be the most effective, or at least more effective than it was in the years previous, just because the university is ready to hear us now.
If I could add something else to that, it was hinted at in the keynote speech last night, this personal and institutional balance. And I think what universities promote is habit change. So recycle, turn off your lights. We have those stickers, BC, is green. We're LEED certified, habit change. But what activism does, and engaging students in these causes, is it forces us to think systemically and politically. And we're actually educating conscious citizens to go into the world and say, I have power beyond just my own habits. I can have a systemic analysis and enact that. And a quote that we often use is, BC, with all of its emissions and all of its electricity and food waste and things like that, could completely disappear and Chestnut Hill could just be bare. And climate change would still be an issue. So we need activists to have a larger analysis of things that are happening. Yeah, and I think that the activism cultivates that kind of consciousness there.
You want to go to Ellen?
I really want to commend you for living the courage of your convictions. Truly. And I have a couple of quick questions. The first is, how have you engaged your alum and the donors, and have you set up escrow funds? Number one. Number two, what do you need from the external community to stand in solidarity and support your campaigns? And number three, how are you supporting each other's campaigns in Catholic universities with the particular message that has been delivered by the Pope and encouraged institutions, like tipping points in some key institutions? And again, I want to say thank you. Truly, you are so inspiring.
May I take a stab at that? To talk about the alumni and the donors, the alumni at BC are actually very inspiring as well. Many people stay local and have this do or die faithfulness to the school and the community. So they come back and they're organizing themselves. And the undergraduates sent letters and made phone calls to every trustee and we got no responses. The alumni just did that as well. And maybe they'll have more luck. And we are part of this multi-school divestment fund where alumni and students can donate to this fund instead of their university, but the university only gets the money if they divest. And a lot of schools are actively fundraising. There's actually a big kitty being saved up there. But when it comes to donors, I think that's a very interesting point. BC just renamed its largest college after this man, Robert Morrissey, who donated an undisclosed amount of money, but who also sits on utility interests in Boston. And many of our trustees sit on utilities boards. And so donors work against us much of the time. But someone mentioned to me today, do you have students saying they're going to boycott a senior class gift and pledge not to donate for their lives until BC divests? And we do have students doing that. I think that's a huge leverage point. But a way you could help is, as an alum, writing letters, making calls, telling your university, this is against my values. Some schools, I forget which school it was, they actually had someone, a famous person, I forget who it was, return their honorary degree and say, until you divest, I don't want to be associated with this school. Things like that are very powerful, because as much as youth have this right to say, the climate is our future, there's a bit of credibility you have when you've, worked for a couple of decades and are an established person.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Erin said. And in our campaign, I've actually found that our alumni outreach is the weakest part of our campaign. We're working on increasing that. Part of it is just how do we reach alumni? The Office of Advancement is very wary of our advancements, so to speak. And so they don't give us contact information or anything, so they see right through what we're trying to do. We're also a part of the Multi-School Divestment Fund, which is a brilliant idea. Hopefully we can move that forward a little bit. In terms of what you can do to help, as Erin said, going back to your own university and saying, what are your investments like, writing them a letter. One of the girls on our campaign who works for Georgetown, she didn't go to Georgetown, wrote back to her university and said, here's a blank check. Here's a check with an amount of money. You may only deposit it once my university divests. So they're building up this pool of checks that the university is getting and saying, oh my gosh, we want to cash this, but we're not allowed to. And it's really cute. Another thing you could just be doing, again, the movement is a national one. It's not specific to a whole bunch of these smaller campaigns. A win for one is a win for all. Go back to the companies that you work for, the places where your pension fund is, and check your own stocks. When my dad had me start a retirement fund for myself, life gets so real. And so going in and checking through, am I fossil free, was huge. I mean, that kind of stuff matters, because when you call Fidelity and say, is my fund fossil free, that does have an impact, because they're saying we need to make sure that we have fossil free funds for people to invest in. In terms of how we cooperate with each other, there is a Jesuit coalition of universities, and I think a larger Catholic one. As Erin said, there's a large open letter to the Pope saying, let's have the Vatican divest, as well as please encourage our universities to divest. There are convergences of students at different schools. Erin has been a part of the Divestment Student Network. And we train each other. I think like we have students from other schools come, alumni from divestment campaigns come and say, this is what worked at our school. Let's talk about how to make it work with yours. So a lot of it, there's some traveling involved, but a lot of it is coming to places like this and saying, let's skill share. It's so important. And we also build valuable skills for ourselves. Like my social media game is way up there now that I've been working on this campaign. I have skills that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Did I put them on my resume? Yes. Did they help me get me a job? Yes. So encourage your kids to get involved, because it's good for them.
Yeah, I basically just have to echo what they said. I can talk a little bit about what we have done. Again, similar to Georgetown, I think alumni and donor engagement is one of our weakest points. We spent so much of last year just really focusing on gaining student support that we have not reached out to alumni as much as we should have yet, but that's something we're looking to do this semester. This semester, we are really hoping to build our framework with faculty and alumni and donors, as well as the students, but just so when Bill McKibben comes next semester, we can hit him with, hit the university with everything we've got, have alumni support, donor support, student support, and have Bill McKibben kind of call into question our endowment investment. The person who founded We Are 9/Fossil Free ND graduated last year, so he's an alumni. So he actually emailed me recently saying, hey, I want to start an alumni network. Is it okay if I do that? So that's in the process. I don't know the status on that yet, because he's currently biking across Europe until the climate talks. But when he gets back, we'll hopefully have a network set, and we will be working on that the rest of the semester.
We have time for one last question, and that'll come from a UD student. Dominic?
Hi guys, I'm Dom Sanfilippo. I'm a senior here. Awesome job. It's pretty inspiring. I'm a senior human rights and philosophy major. Our entire senior human rights cohort is here. You guys raise your hands. with our program director, and I think it's pretty awesome to see what you guys are doing. I was the director of academic affairs here for 2 years and the lead rep to our university senate, and I'm now our Center for Social Concern program assistant. Hearing all you guys talk, maybe so many things run through my mind of both differences and similarities of universities. I feel very lucky and appreciative of all the times at UD that when we come into conflict, we're able to have access. I can't think of it. With Provost Benson, we have meetings every 2 weeks to sit down and discuss things, and I know if I called Vice President Horner or somebody else, they'd be there to listen and talk. So I feel very appreciative in that sense. We still have a long way to go in a lot of things too. You talked about the Board of Trustees. I think at last count, our board at UD of 32, I believe you quote me if I'm wrong, for somebody here, has 6 women and 5 persons of color, so we got a long way to go too. But my question would be, you talked a little bit about activism and the interlinking of these issues. I'm sure you guys, especially in DC, Caroline, you probably, I don't know if you were there and seen it when Pope Francis was speaking to Congress, had Dorothy Day as one of his 4 Americans as an ideal Catholic. That's no small matter. Dorothy Day was not necessarily somebody hiding in the corner keeping her views to herself. She was a troublemaker, and she was not doing it to tear down communities, she was doing it to build it up, and it was pretty extraordinary. My question would be, what do you guys see as us as 21 and 22-year-olds? What issues coalesce and are interconnected with climate change, divestment? I know, Erin, you had mentioned anything around race and around communities that are disproportionately affected. What issues do you see as intimately interconnected with this? And as Catholic student leaders at Catholic universities, any ideas on how we can sort of come together as a force for that? Because I think there's a need for it. I'm hearing a need for it.
And each of you will have no more than 2 minutes to answer. But it's a great topic for lunchtime conversation, I have to say. So Erin, you want to begin?
Yes, I'll be brief. But a question I get often is, what if you win divestment? Do you guys disappear? And the answer would be no. I think that the way divestment and climate change ties into other issues is being lived out through reinvestment. So I touched on it, it's being touched on here, but if you pull your money out of Exxon, but you put it into PepsiCo, who's funding a lot of bad climate stuff, that's not really much better. So you have to make sure that your investments are actually just. And I mean, I think everyone lives on the planet, so climate intersects with all issues. But particularly if you're thinking of women, I think 70–80% of climate refugees so far are women. So this is a women's rights issue. It's intergenerational justice. It is, I'm very passionate about this being a racial justice issue for sure. And so even within the movement, we can educate each other and make sure that when we move forward with all these things in mind. And as a student who personally comes from the poverty line, I very much care about raising the minimum wage and economic justice and things like that. So I think that's tied into it as well. Can everyone afford to live in our climate? And how are we redistributing that so everyone has a chance moving forward?
Yeah, we recently started a campaign, a photo campaign, where we have people hold up a sign that says, if you care about blank, you care about climate, and they fill in the blank. Because I think that one thing that the environmental movement is finally making progress on is moving towards an environmental justice perspective, as opposed to just let's save the polar bears. As Erin said, all for the polar bears, but this is a broader movement. So we've brought other clubs together to talk about the intersections with race and environment, about how so many of the people who are frontline communities in that the fossil fuel industry are harming are indigenous people, are people of color, are living in underserved areas, are not having good educations. So we try to highlight those things and saying, look, the carbon thing, we know you can't see carbon. We know it's a difficult thing to picture, but what you can picture is environmental racism. What you can picture are gender divides that are perpetuated by the evils of the fossil fuel industry. And then we also, in a very Jesuit way, talk about the global poor, and about we're trying to do something where we take blue tape and mark it around campus, however many feet high, and say this is how underwater will be at a certain amount of time, or where other people will be. Unfortunately, Georgetown is on a hill, so it's not completely accurate, so we're trying to do that in other places, but saying one of the Georgetown values is men and women for others. And so we try to push that onto care for the global poor. We're very conscious of being an intersectional movement.
Okay. So I'm an environmental engineer, and what we talk a lot about in my classes is water and water availability and fresh water availability, and how that affects all these different areas. And with climate change, water use, or the problems associated with water use, are excavated. So that has implications on food availability, on homes and shelters, an entire country being underwater. That's huge. So, and then also just fresh and clean drinking water availability. And these are all basic human rights. So what I see the connection is with climate change and is between climate change, affecting basic human rights, and how we as Catholics need to not only provide these basic human rights to people, because you see that in a lot of charities, we'll send people to go build a well in a third world country to make sure they have water. Well, if we have climate change and the sea levels rise and the water in the well is now salt water, then we didn't do any good. So, and with fossil fuel companies contributing to climate change and exacerbating these issues, that's just, by divesting in fossil fuels, that's just one thing we can do to prevent these issues from happening and making existing problems even larger.
I'd like to thank our student panelists for their leadership and their great comments. You know, one of the great privileges we have in Catholic colleges and universities is these students who genuinely internalize our values, and certainly these three students are representatives of their university missions in that way. Lunch is directly across the hall. We reconvene here at 1:30.